Good afternoon, and thank you for joining everyone. I am Sarthak from NatHealth, and I'm really excited to have you all here in this expert session today. We would be talking about the role of clinical governance for universal health coverage, and what clinical governance is all about, and why clinical governance is relevant, and what is the next steps ahead. We have an eminent panel to talk about this topic. We have with us Dr. Chandrika from Even Healthcare, Dr. Anup, who's the chairman of geriatric medicine, Manipal Hospital, and Dr. Jairam, who is the advisor of Shears. So before moving, I'll just quickly read the short profile of each one of them, and then we can move ahead. Um,
You're not audible, Sarthak. No, this is cracking and there's no sound. Sarthak, you're not audible. There is some problem with your audio. There's only crackle that we can hear. May I suggest that if your audio is giving trouble, that we just introduce ourselves or?
Am I audible now, sir?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So I'll just introduce quickly the panel. Dr. Jairam currently is an advisor, Shears India, and an independent healthcare for several healthcare-related organizations. He was the chairman, CEO, and group medical director for Columbia Asia Hospitals in India. He was associated with Columbia Asia throughout his journey in India. He continues as member of board for Columbia Asia Pacific Communities. He is a board member of VST Tractors and Tillers and of Medica Synergy Hospitals. He holds the position of past president of the president for LMS Trust. He serves on the board of SCSO, a non-profit organization for global health initiative. He serves on the board of Aditya Birla Health Insurance, and he has also been inducted on the boards of Portia. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Dr. Anup Amarnath is the chairman of geriatric medicine in Manipal Hospitals. He's a gold medalist trained extensively in the United Kingdom and one of the only few geriatricians in the country. He has specialized in geriatric medicines from Royal College of Physicians, London. He has worked in various hospitals across UK. He has, in fact, been one of the very few to subspecialize in geriatric nephrology. The American Society of Nephrology awarded him a certificate during their annual conference. He was chosen to be the organizing registrar for the prestigious MRCP exams conducted by the Royal College of Physicians at York Hospitals. And Dr. Chandrika Kammam, she is a qualified internal medicine consultant from United States of America. After working as hospitalists in United States, she returned to India and joined Columbia Asia groups of hospital, primarily to start the concept of hospital medicine. She currently holds the position of Director for Clinical Service for the HCG Group of Hospital India and have occupied this position since November 2019. With over 20 years of experience in both clinical medicine and administration, she has helped to deliver value-based healthcare with lean thinking concept. Her strength has been to identify strategic programs that will benefit the organization and envision future trends and formulate thought processes from ideation to implementation. A very warm welcome to Dr. Chandrika and a very warm welcome to all our panelists. So to start off with, we can, I request Dr. Chandrika to please present and then we will move forward. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sarthak. Just a small correction. I'm a medical director at Even, which is a startup company which kind of is looking at a managed care concept in India. So thank you, NatHealth, for giving this opportunity, and a warm welcome to my panelists, my co-speakers as well. So let us start the session. I would like to just give you an introduction to what we are going to do over the next 1 hour. So the topic that we have chosen to discuss today is about clinical governance in the era of universal health cover. As we all know, there is a lot of buzzword in current market about covering all the spectrum of care, bringing OPD under the ambit of insurance, bringing elderly care under the ambit of insurance, and also the many insurtech companies that have come into play, which are looking at how to change the game of insurance and the coverage thereof it is going to offer. Yes, all these are good things and definitely a positive way forward for our country. But what is it that is very important for us to put in place before we look at the universal health cover? So that is going to be the topic that we are going to discuss today. Next slide, please. So what is clinical governance? When we say clinical governance, it is a structure that we put in place in order to monitor the clinical activity that is happening in the hospital. For that, the most important ingredients of clinical governance is the first, the thought process of the board. So the board has to realize that in a healthcare business, as much as we give importance to the financial health of the organization, it is important that we look at the clinical health of the organization as well, the quality of the doctors, the qualification of the doctors, the way they are practicing medicine, etc., etc. So the board definitely has to give the direction to the leadership, who in turn helps to put in the systems and processes in place and develop the teams that are going to deliver these outcomes. And like any other thing, this is a moving target. So continuously, we have to look at where we are and where we need to reach in terms of clinical health of the organization. Next slide, please. The most important aspects of setting the clinical governance is the culture of doing the right thing to the right patient at the right time, the ethics, the integrity, and the transparency of practicing clinical medicine, and executing it in the letter and spirit, and not just to satisfy any accrediting body. And it has to be an open platform to learn from each other, and participation of all stakeholders is very, very important. In many places where I go, where we are discussing a lot of improvement in the healthcare delivery system, insurance, be it insurance, be it digital adoption, doctors and nurses are not involved at all, and many times their representation is less than 1%. So it is very important that we bring these end users into the forefront, because they are the ones who are going to implement these clinical protocols at the grassroots level. Next slide, please. So when this is happening at the hospital level, where the board is giving the directions, where the leadership is putting the systems and process in place, building the team, and creating a culture of openness where people can thrive and implement the clinical protocols and look at the outcomes of care, then how do we extrapolate this at the national level? At the national level, what we need is a think tank, a research body, and who can create the policies and the procedures and help in disseminating, training, and monitoring of these protocols, and help in audit, because the auditing has to be done by a third party, an unbiased party, to look at how the hospitals or the doctors are practicing clinical medicine, and they have to publish the compliance protocol, and there also has to be a way or a protocol of not following these protocols. What are the consequences of not following these protocols also have to be put in place. So extrapolating the clinical governance from the clinics to hospitals to the national level is the need of the hour in our today's healthcare scenario. Next slide, please. So let us see what is happening in other countries. I'm sure Dr. Anup will have a lot of inputs on this as after I finish my talk. But just to give you a brief, the National the Health Services of UK went through a lot of rough patch in the 90s, when their accountability was decreasing, and there were a lot of medical legal issues, quality related issues, and patient complaints were increasing, medical legal cases were increasing. So the team came together and they said, in order to improve the NHS image, in front of the people, they embarked on a journey of clinical governance. The term clinical governance actually comes from UK, where they kind of published a paper called New NHS, Modern and Dependable, that came out in 1997. There, the clinical governance was established under three main pillars. That is, the pillar one was to ensure that the physicians are doing the right thing for the patient. The pillar two was that their knowledge is updated as they go along in their career. And third one was to continuously improve the quality of clinical services. Under these three pillars, they also established the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, what we call as a NICE. And the NICE guidelines are probably famous throughout the world, which gives us the recommendations on managing various clinical conditions and protocols, and to which each and every practicing clinical doctor of UK has to adhere to. And they also set up the audit committees, the quality assurance team, and continuing medical education board in order to monitor the clinical delivery of each and every doctor in the country. So if this is what was happening in UK, and let us see what is happening in the US. In the US, the movement actually started quite early in 1965, where they first set up the Utilization Review Committee. And followed by that, there was a landmark paper in 1999, To Err is Human, Crossing the Quality Chasm. And that led to the further strengthening of their quality forums. They set up a national quality forum, Joint Commission became more active. And over the last 15-20 years, the US has significantly moved in the way they are monitoring outcomes across the country. Today, JCI releases the annual report of almost 20 to 30 clinical indicators across US, and they also set up the 1% more payment for the doctors for adopting digital medical records in their clinics and various other areas. They also set up something called a physician quality reporting system, where the outpatient quality parameters were also started reporting by the physician, and there was an additional compensation for the same, for doing that. So they have gone quite ahead in the journey, and by setting up all these organizations, all of which are not for profit, coming up with protocols, coming up with guidelines which the insurance and the hospitals and the doctors can follow, and also incentivizing the doctors for adopting the electronic medical records, incentivizing doctors for participating in the physician quality reporting system, which is called as a PQRS system, has all been set up, and they are moving further ahead by setting up many more such quality parameters and monitoring systems, like hospital compare, leapfrog indicators, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So lessons from the other countries. So what do we learn? What do we see? What is happening in the other countries? The compensation spectrum has always been across the care journey. So whether it is NHS or US or any other country, there was the insurance covers end to end. Whether it is the private insurance or the government sponsored insurance, they cover the entire spectrum of journey of the patient. The compensation is similar to here, where they have a combination of packages, co-pays, slabs, and most importantly, they are also based on clinical outcomes, which is lacking today in our country. And there is a strong disincentives for hospital-acquired infections, complications, so on and so forth. And there is an annual report, as I said, JACO publishes an annual report on clinical outcomes, and there is a hospital compare to look at the procedures and their outcomes, and third-party executed patient reported outcome measures, and extension of these into outpatient setting, incentivization for EMR, and incentivization of doctors for reporting outcome measures are all the areas that are covered in other countries, and many of which are lacking for us at this point of time. So where are we in India? So in India, we established a National Accreditation Board for Hospitals and Healthcare Providers in 2005. And the main concept being to focus on patient safety and quality, through a process of self and external evaluation. And Ministry of Health and Family Welfare continues to monitor the major indicators like maternal mortality, infant mortality, vaccination, and communicable diseases. The National Health Authority also recently looking at implementing quality outcomes for the Ayushman Bharat patients, like example, readmission rate, and so on and so forth. But majorly, the clinical audits, the mortality reviews, the key clinical performance indicators happen behind the closed doors of all our hospitals. And the learnings get to be shared only within that community and not anywhere else. So hardly any learning comes out from our clinical outcomes or reviews to be known to general public or to other healthcare providers. And large part of the care where there is no governance or very little governance is in the outpatient setting, because the outpatient delivery not only happens in major corporate hospitals and government hospitals, but also in smaller nursing homes and clinics. So why is it relevant for us in India? We have a desire to develop a concept of universal coverage. We want to include the complete spectrum of patient care into the insurance ambit. That is outpatient cover, domiciliary cover, rehabilitation, so on and so forth. We also want to bring in a lot of patient cohorts under the insurance ambit, which they have been refused today. For example, cancer patients, or be it chronic disease patients, degenerative disease patients, rheumatological conditions, etc. Many of them are refused insurance because of their chronic medical ongoing problem. So because of we want to achieve all these three areas, clinical governance is very important for us. If we don't have clinical governance, what will happen in each of these areas? So I would like to go over this briefly and then also give you a practical example of what I see that happens day in and day out when we are looking at outpatient coverage. The customer or a patient today is not used to follow protocols. Today, especially in the outpatient scenario, they are used to go to the doctors they wish, and they want to take treatment as they wish because they are the payers. So if they have a mild epigastric discomfort, they will directly go to a gastroenterologist. Or if they have a chest pain, even if it is non-cardiac, probably they will first go to a cardiologist, or a cough to a pulmonologist. So in a structured environment where insurance has to cover the cost of care, such a system, open system, will be very detrimental, as the resources for seeing such super specialists are very sparse, and utilizing them for inappropriate way will add a lot of burden to the system. Similarly, today doctors are not hardcore monitored by any organization on their practice. So a lot of them today are and also they're scared that if something goes wrong, what is the fallback option that they have. So they would always try to err on the side of caution, and they would rather over investigate than under investigate, rather over treat than under treat. So this definitely increases the cost of care for the payers as well as to the patient. And hospitals, of course, because of the cost that is involved, and the regulatory restrictions, insurance payers, etc., etc., they will also face the similar issues, and not being able to provide adequate and proper care to the patient because of lack of regulations. And similarly, the payers. So for a payer, it is even more difficult, because without having a proper clinical governance structure, they will not know what to fall back on. And they are not, many of them might not be from the clinical background. They might not have a clinical board to say what is right and what is wrong. So some of the relevant, the practical examples that I can give you is a patient with hypothyroidism on thyroxine and a stable TSH, want to check the TSH every month, because they feel that if I have a OPD insurance which is covered, Why not check it? And similarly, a patient with diabetes want to check their HbA1c frequently. And sometimes the doctors say, I don't believe A lab versus a B lab. So you have to go to the lab that I suggest, even though the test was done within last 1 month. So sometimes I do hear people saying, I want to undergo a health check every 6 months because it is covered. And there are instances where the LFTs were slightly abnormal, and the patient was prescribed a series of tests without going through proper history. If this is on the extremes of over treatment, there are also places where there is under treatment, where a woman probably would have helped by a mammogram, never went through a mammogram, and got her breast cancer diagnosed quite in an advanced stage. So as you can see, both overuse and underuse will result in increase in the cost of care, and the universal cover becomes unsustainable when we have this variation in the practice and the way we deliver the clinical care. So what next for us? So we have seen what has happened in the UK, we have seen what has happened in the US, and we have also looked at what is happening in our country currently. So for us to go forward from where we are, we need to also develop standard treatment protocols for which are relevant to our country. The step towards that, ICMR has developed a standard treatment protocols, and for about many disease conditions, but the implementation of that is questionable. The reasons are many. Can we have the next slide, please? So as you can see, the difference between what we have done in India versus what is happening at UK. In UK, when the NICE guidelines are developed, the NICE as an organization itself is a statutory body, and it is mandatory that every clinician follows those guidelines, and it is not written in stone, or it doesn't take away the autonomy of the physician. It gives enough leeway for the doctors to do what they are supposed to do for a patient, and if they have to deviate from the protocol, there is always a provision provided by that, as long as there is a reason for it. But we do not have any such provision. Though ICMR has developed and released the protocols, they are hardly known to people. There is no effort for dissemination of these protocols. There is no effort to train, and there is no effort to tell people what are the consequences if we do not follow these guidelines. Next slide, please. So what should be our way forward? We should also think of forming an authority, a statutory body that work on standard clinical guidelines from various specialty. The doctors from various specialty has to participate in this. We also need to bring in a concept of a primary care physician as a gatekeeper, and who kind of in turn refers the patient to various specialists and super specialists based on the need of the patient. And incentives for adopting good clinical practices, like usage of digital health records, clinical documentation, reporting, and measuring participation in measuring clinical outcomes are very important for us. A strong research, training, and development has to be set up at the central, which primary responsibilities is to develop clinical leaders who in turn go back to the grassroots level, that is to the hospitals, and implement what has been decided by the statutory body. And of course, we have to give independence to doctors, because each patient is different, and each patient, the way they respond to treatment is different. But there has to be some standardization, and record the deviation from that standardization, so that we also understand what is the clinical nature of the disease, and the way it is progressing, and the way it is responding to various treatment. So how will this help us? So clinical protocols that are universally accepted, then it becomes a foundation for us to design any insurance products. It will also help us to understand the cost of care, and the cost at which the care will be delivered. Both payer and providers can come on the same platform. Hospitals can be brought on the same platform, and different hospitals can execute the care in the same way. and it will make the care delivery more transparent and predictable. It also gives doctors a backup in case of any untoward events, because even sometimes when I follow a protocol, there might be a situation where there is a medical legal issue or an adverse clinical outcome. So at least the doctors then will have a fallback option saying that, yes, I followed these guidelines which are recommended by our country, our statutory body. And if there can be an adverse event, so there is a solid backup for doctors as well. And it will be very easy for us to audit and also measure the deviation, which will further help us in research and other such areas. So now, as I earlier said, there are many new age insurance products that are coming, and these products are actually blurring the line between the payer, provider, processor, and the seller. And there are very innovative products that have come, like covering the telemedicine, the OPD coverage, the OPD diagnostics, the IPD cover, pharma, home care, so on and so forth. So, in the absence of clear guidelines from clinical governance and IRDA's approval, how do we innovate and go forward to realize the dream of universal coverage? As I have elaborated in few of my earlier slides, I have my thoughts. I have put down my thoughts. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Anoop and Dr. Jairam about what they think we should do before we embark on the journey of universal coverage. Let me first go with Dr. Anoop.
Thanks, Dr. Chandrika. So that's wonderful presentation, summarizing the entire gist of clinical governance. And as you rightly said, UK was the kind of cradle for clinical governance to start off. And when we trained in UK, I think that was something which was drilled down into us right from day one about what is clinical governance and what are audits and so on and so forth. So I think that kind of a setup is something which would be beneficial to not just the patients, but also the providers, the payers, and the entire health ecosystem. So with that background, I think what we will also want to look into is going forward. Healthcare up until now was entirely dependent on an institutionalized provision in terms of hospitals, nursing homes, and clinics. But as we all see going forward, we are moving more towards care at the point of need. So wherever care is required, I think healthcare is going there, whether we are looking at home care, remote care, or even technology. So when we're talking about clinical governance, I think going a step forward, we need to be future-proofing ourselves in terms of ensuring that this concept of clinical governance is part of the entire healthcare ecosystem, rather than just confined to hospitals, nursing homes, and clinics. Now, what does this mean when we look at clinical governance covering the entire healthcare ecosystem? So, of late, what we have seen is that if you're looking at the e-pharma component, a big step up from the good old days of neighborhood pharmacies. So wherever you are, you can get your medicines. E-labs, again, a big step up from the good old hospitals only where the labs were there. And then we had the standalone labs, and now we have the e-labs. Wearables coming up in a big way. And so you have, whether it's the branded ones or the commercially branded ones or the industrial grade ones. So wearables are here to stay, and that's an important element of healthcare delivery. And then coming to remote care, home care, and managed care. So these are healthcare provisions which happen outside of the hospital system. Now, in all these things, I missed out on one, which is insurance. So insurtech. So gone are the days when you had the agent coming up and selling the insurance policies. All that is required is now a click, and then you get your policy up and running. So in this era where everything care is delivered at the point of need and the acquisition of care can happen at the click of a button, I think it becomes even more challenging to implement clinical governance and to bring all these things under the ambit of clinical governance. Let's look at one single example, one small example. This is a bugbear which we as clinicians always face in the hospital. Somebody wants to have a remote care setup, and everyone's got these wearables. So they say, doc, I've got this wearable, and I'm going to have a live feed given to you about the vital parameters. It's a great concept. Out of hospital, I can monitor patients. But the question is, who owns the liability for this component of data? A person may have a very low blood pressure, and then he or she would always say, look, this data is being transmitted to you. And would me as a clinician be accountable for this kind of data which is flowing in? Or is it the person who is getting the data out, extracting the data out, the wearable device company, would they be in charge, or they be accountable for the data which is coming out? Or finally, when this data is in the cloud, whether it would be the servers where this is hosted would they be accountable for that one? I'm talking purely from a clinical standpoint. So if there's an abnormality in data, so who will be responsible? Yes, an Apple will pick up a cardiac event, but then who is going to act upon the cardiac event unless the patient is coming into hospital? Then comes the insurance part. A lot of data goes on, and then an insurance policy is provided, and this data is lying around. So strictly speaking, the owner of the data is the patient or from whom the data is being generated. But then it is the accountability of the platform as well to manage that data. So we have seen data breaches, we have seen these kind of abnormal results coming out, but then the question is, who is going to be liable for all these things? So this is exactly where the concept of clinical governance comes in, and then makes people accountable for this new age healthcare delivery. The same thing can be extrapolated for something like a home care or a remote care. So somebody is being monitored at home or treated at home, but if something is out of range, or a treatment is not in line with the said practices, so who is going to monitor that? So where does clinical governance come in over there? So I think the bottom line is, as and when we go forward, yes, it's a very fluid area, but I think in terms of best practices, and if India needs to lead the way, clinical governance, this entire ecosystem of healthcare delivery, which is happening whether at the hospitals, nursing home clinics, e-pharma, e-lab, wearables, I think wherever health is involved, it should entirely come under the ambit of clinical governance. And that is where you can do maximum justice to the people who need healthcare. The immediate next question is, who should be responsible for drafting these? Of course, as industry bodies, it's very important that we bring these kind of concepts up at an industry level. And whether any of these industry body, NATHEALTH, FICCI, CII, I think it's very important that these discussions happen at these bodies. Because I think once these kind of discussions happen, then the first few green shoots of the guidelines will emerge. This is what happened with the telemedicine guidelines. I still remember March 2020, just before the lockdown happened. We knew that up until then we didn't have telemedicine being legalized in India, and we had this meeting under the aegis of NATHEALTH, and then the NHA was there, and within 48 hours, the new guidelines of legalizing telemedicine came about. So it doesn't require a pandemic for us to do that. And given the fact that we have these platforms where we can discuss this, I think it's very important that these discussion points happen, then get distilled into actionable points, so that the entire healthcare ecosystem comes under the ambit of clinical governance. So the industry bodies are a very good platform to discuss this. And finally, as you rightly pointed out, who would be the competent authority in terms of implementing this? So I personally feel that, given the wonderful work with the NHA, which the NHA is doing, I think it would really be an important, organ in terms of deciding and implementing on clinical governance guidelines across healthcare delivery spectrum. So essentially, to summarize from my end, if you're looking at clinical governance, we need to bring each and every healthcare delivery system, not just pure healthcare, but healthcare allied services, lab, pharma, insurance, wearables, entirely under the ambit of healthcare, number one. These platforms, industry bodies are very good in terms of discussing and coming up with certain guidelines, draft guidelines. And I think going forward, NHA would be a very competent authority to ensure that these guidelines are implemented across the healthcare ecosystem. So these are my three points, taking forward what you had said about clinical governance. I think we'll get Dr. Jairam into the conversation now.
Yeah. So thank you, Anup. I think so we went through what is clinical governance, what is happening in other countries, and why do we need clinical governance. And Anup touched upon a very important aspect of newer ways of delivering care, and how even that should be come under the ambit of clinical governance. So now, Dr. Jairam, can you please throw some light on how should NAT, if at all we take this up as an agenda, how should we take it forward? And like Anup gave few examples of who is the competent authority. So can you please elaborate a little bit more on that, how we should take this forward?
Thank you. Before I really start, I must say that there's a level of comfort, understanding that there are young leaders now who are thinking on the right lines. What I've heard you, Dr. Chandrika, and Dr. Anup speak is music to my ears. I wish to say that the quality movement in India started very early. In fact, in 1995, the CII Institute of Quality established, tried to look at healthcare quality. But throughout its journey from 1995 to date, what has the quality been, what aspect of quality has been looked at? It is not clinical governance. It is the quality in terms of the processes, the hospital setup, the size of the operating room, the air conditioning, etc., etc., etc. So the bigger picture of clinical governance was completely left out of the ambit of our country. There is another point that we should all remember, and that is that no governance can ever succeed unless there is a will on the part of four players. The doctors primarily, and under that I'd include just not the doctors, but other allied services like nursing and so on. Insurance, hospital administrators, and the government. If all are not on the same page, this will simply not work. Let us say today NATHEALTH takes this up, or for that matter, anybody. It could be the NHA, it could be NATHEALTH, it could be anybody who takes up this as a task. Will it succeed? My square answer is no. And why do I say it? That is because it's not that it has not been tried. Some of us who were committed to the cause of quality in this country tried very hard to push clinical quality and governance in an infantile stage in many ways. But it has not seen the light of day because everybody doesn't sit on it. Should we give up? The answer is a definite no. That is simply not acceptable under any circumstances. And so what is required really is what we did as a group through NATHEALTH, FICCI, and CII way back when these organizations started. Well, not FICCI and CII, but NATHEALTH started. And that was to try and get the insurance and the hospitals and the government onto the same table to sit down and discuss. Yes, NHA is a body which looks at the future of healthcare in this country. But by and large, its activities is directed towards the government sector. It has little, if any, influence on the private sector, except with regard to the schemes that the government is offering and the costs. That is a constant fight between the private sector and the NHA. Apart from that, tell me, is there any other aspect of private healthcare that the NHA kind of really governs? The answer is no. Does NABH do it? The answer is no, because that is not a body that is for by any means statutory. It is voluntary to get accreditation. So I think the step one would be to get all these people through the aegis of NatHealth to sit on the same table and say, let's look at quality. While all of you spoke about very many aspects of clinical governance, the one aspect that I'd like to bring out, which will attract and probably be the appropriate noise that the government and the insurance agencies would hear, is that it has an impact on healthcare costs. All of us know that if you deliver quality care, the cost at which that care is delivered is not as much as if it is in an unregulated fashion. Take, for example, hospital-related infections. Take, for example, over-investigation in order that you practice protective medicine. These are examples of how you can overrun costs for unnecessary reasons. And this should be the primary focus, not because that is the end point, but because that is the point that will attract these people onto the same table. Once we sit on the same table, the rest of it is easy. We have the nice guidelines. We have the guidelines that the USA and various other countries follow. I'm not saying we should blindly adopt them, but I'm saying we have a rule book on which you can work speedily and evolve what is right for this country and add. Now, for example, the way drug-resistant tuberculosis is handled in India is fantastic. And I don't think that such comparisons would exist in the rest of the world. So we need to use local talent capability and work with existing systems to create a governance that is appropriate for ourselves. And finally, I would say that it is necessary that we push this at all levels of education. At the undergraduate levels, whoever hears about governance, clinical governance is a word that is not known to them. They know about NICE guidelines, but do they ever feel that it should be applied here? My answer is a firm no. So at undergraduate, postgraduate levels, awakening to the value and importance of clinical governance is very important. I would say my last word by a strong statement to say we are behind time on this. We need to run, and we need to run fast. There is a treadmill that is running faster than you, and you have to run that as fast as you can, because governance, apart from everything else, also saves lives. And let's accept it. If you lose a patient to hospital-acquired infection, that could have been prevented by appropriate practices of clinical governance. That is one simple example of what I'd say. Now, I can go on and on, because this is a topic that is really passionate to myself and in my heart. But I'm happy to say that I laud NatHealth for taking this as the first topic. And it is fantastic that it also selected people who are committed to it. So I would stop here so that we have enough time to take up some of the questions or perhaps comments of good quality from the audience. Thank you, Chandrika, Anup, and Sarthak for having me this afternoon. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Charam.
Thank you so much.
We open the floor for any comments.
Yes, I would request anyone from the audience, if they have any questions, please write down that on the chat box. And if you don't have any questions, I have a questions. I have one question specifically for Dr. Anu. Maybe you would be answering it because it is mostly within the private healthcare sector. So Dr. Anu, besides PMJ, how else can India and more specifically private healthcare work towards universal health coverage?
A very interesting question, when we're looking at universal health coverage and the private healthcare service providers. And as Dr. Jairam was earlier on saying, I think it's very important for us to look into healthcare costs when we're discussing about universal health coverage. So I think if you look at the data, we know that bulk of the healthcare provision in the country happens via private healthcare. And yes, with the new Ayushman Bharat and the Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers which are coming up, a lot of impetus is there on the government sector to get into healthcare provision. So I think, these are not mutually exclusive at all. I think we will have to work in tandem. I think we will, there are certain things which the private sector brings onto the table. There's a certain set of things which the government sector brings onto the table. So I think we need to look at the benefits of working together. And one of the issues there would be how do we rationalize healthcare costs? So at the end of the day, it would all boil down to that in terms of ensuring a seamless universal health coverage is rolled out, keeping in mind the quality and the type of top-end healthcare service delivery which happens in the private sector. So I think going forward, if we can have a rationalization of those healthcare costs, and if we have a tandem working practice between these two sectors, something remarkable can be achieved in terms of providing universal healthcare across India.
Great. That is an excellent suggestion, Dr. Anup. The next question that I would like to ask Dr. Jairam, because since he told that we are actually behind time and it is need to run and we need to run fast. So, Dr. Jairam, do you believe that the pandemic has provided any push to us in the way forward? Like now people are more coming under health coverage and they are kind of interested in getting more health coverage. Do you think that the pandemic actually has pushed us to fast track this?
Well, the pandemic did several things. I think, number one, it opened the route of remote medicine and telemedicine very strongly. And the number of people who kind of accessed telemedicine and teleconsultations during that period was phenomenally high after it became legally sound to do this practice. The second is that it created healthcare infrastructure of a kind that I never imagined could happen in this country at very short notice. Number three, and I'm sure both Chandrika and Anup would nod their heads in with respect to this question, and that is that protocols were established by the government, periodically modified by the government, based on WHO, based on various other factors, and reimbursements by the government was made based on this. So they created, in fact, for COVID, a kind of governance. Of course, they did it with a stick, which I think was not very appropriate, but they did it. And people followed it because they knew that reimbursements would only be possible if you followed those protocols. They simply discounted. I mean, they didn't accept to pay for those areas of care which were outside the ambit of their recommendation. So, in effect, it created a kind of governance, but restricted it to COVID. So, yes, if you take that as a starting point, I think many things changed. I would also add, it opened the eyes of the public to the value and importance of healthcare insurance like never before. People started accepting the fact that it is unwise to remain uninsured, even in a country like India where healthcare costs are relatively lower. But yes, today that is another thing that has certainly happened. So these, I think, are lessons that the pandemic has taught people, hospitals, and government.
Definitely. And thank you so much for your insights. My next question will be for Dr. Chandrika. Dr. Chandrika, I just wanted to know, you think what are the roles of preventive care and wellness programs for universal health coverage? Like what roles they can play?
Definitely, they play a very important role. As I was telling you in one of my example, there are many areas that we don't focus on preventive aspects. like, for example, screening mammograms, screening pap smears, colon cancer screening, the PSA screening for prostate cancer. And based on the family history and the chronic comorbidities, there are many areas which we can look at in a proactive manner, so that the disease does not progress forward. For example, getting the diabetes under control, so that it doesn't hurt the kidneys, doesn't hurt the eyes, doesn't have the long-term cardiovascular impact, so on and so forth. So all this helps us to kind of prevent the disease progression, and also helps us to manage the cost. Like, imagine if a diabetic who's uncontrolled goes into urinary tract infection, and then from there sepsis, etc., etc. The cost of managing such a health condition is definitely going to be a lot compared to compared to what we could do by controlling the sugars and keeping the person healthy, having regular follow-ups, making sure proactively the person is doing what is the right thing to do, so on and so forth. So there are many areas like that where we can implement clinical protocols, which looks at wellness, which looks at preventive aspects of care, which in turn helps us to decrease the acute cost burden.
Indeed. Thank you. And my last questions, and I would want all the speakers to have some words regarding to it. Well, what do you think? How far away is India from actual real-time universal coverage? We'll start off with Dr. Jairam, and then Dr. Anup and Dr. Chandrika.
Well, I think we are 5 years away. And why do I say this? If you had asked me this question at the time of the pandemic or before that, I would have said 1 decade. But I see that NHA has really accelerated and is moving very fast. The other day, I was privy to a talk by one of the persons from NHA, and I was pleasantly surprised at the depth and the detailed manner in which they have already worked on many aspects. I think that I'm confident that some announcements in this regard will happen on the 15th of August this year, and thereafter things will roll out very fast. Will governance be a part of it? Unfortunately, I don't think so, but I do hope that we are able to, as a group, push this with the government henceforth.
Yeah.
Dr. Anup.
Yeah, I also believe that we are not very far off. There's a specific reason I say that. What UPI did to the payments, scenario, I think the UHI is going to do that to healthcare, and I think that's the reason I feel positive towards the fact that universal healthcare is not too far off. And to a large extent, what I feel has happened over the last few years is that India is setting the trend. You have UPI now being replicated across the world, even in some European countries, and the UPI equivalent, which was there in US, I think they're learning a lot from our experience in UPI. So I think once the UHI comes in, that's going to be a game changer. And as we were discussing, it may not be too far off. So I think to answer your question about universal health coverage, not too far off.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with both Dr. Jaram and Dr. Anup, because I think as a country we have laid the foundation. Whether the foundation is about NHA looking very progressively towards outcome measures and value-based payment system, or whether it is adopting digital health, that the Universal Health ID, which not only looking at Universal Health ID, there is a whole gamut of things that are going on there. So there is a health information exchange platform for insurance, for hospitals, for patients, and then there is a data bank that is going to be built on the clinical care providers. So I think the foundation, we have laid the foundation, and we already have NABH to a certain extent looking at the systems and processes. And we also have the new NMC coming up, and a lot of new guidelines being put forward for the practitioners. So with all this in place, I think it's just a matter of of taking it one step forward and looking at how do we build our protocols which are implementable, implemented, monitored, and looked at the consequences of not following it as we go along. So ICMR, as we all know, had already developed the standard treatment guidelines, but that small push, the last leg is what we need. And I think that push, if it comes from all of us and the the government organizations, sky is the limit for us.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Jairam and Dr. Anup and Dr. Chandrika, for taking your time out and speaking about such an important topic. And hopefully everyone comes together, and the next steps will be taken very, very soon regarding this. Before ending the conversations, I'm just thankful that you have taken your time out. And if there are any questions from the audience, we will take it away right now. Or you can just email me your questions, and I will email those questions to the speakers, and those questions will be answered. And thank you. So we are 4 minutes early, but we'll be concluding the excellent series. And this is just one of the talks that we have started with. Next week, again, we have a topic on operational excellencies. One second, just a second. I'll just let, so improving operational efficiencies by using digital health. And I guess every week we will have a NATHEALTH expert series session from now onwards. And I'll also request everyone who is attending this talk, please attend the subsequent series as well. And all the session series are recorded, and it will be uploaded on YouTube and our social media channels. And also we will make a curative report out of this and share it across all the members of NATHEALTH. Thank you so much for your time, everyone, and have a good night.